partisan and dysfunctional. I think that there's a lot that we can do. And let me just give you three of the issues I think we could work together on. And by the way, I also think that behind the scenes, there's a growing desire to see this done by both parties. Healthcare, immigration reform, federal budget, addressing the opioid crisis. There's a lot. And so what I'm committing myself to trying to do is obviously push forward the important interests and agenda of my constituents in the first congressional district, but also to kind of foster a return to collegiality and stability so that we can get this stuff done and we can stop wasting from self-made crisis to self-made crisis. Okay, let's go to the question. Thank you. Great. Okay, the first question is federal pay and COLA cuts. Is there anything that can be done to stop the president from canceling the pay raise and COLA for federal workers and retirees at a time when he says the economy is great and when he has cut taxes for millionaires? I don't know if you heard this question, but this is exactly the way I would have said it. The president announced that he wasn't going to have the cost of living increase for federal workers because we can't afford it. This is just after they passed that tax cut that primarily benefits corporations and the very top, not even 1%, less than 1%. There is something we can do, and there's a general sense in Washington that we will do it. In the Senate version of one of the appropriations bills, they did put the cost of living increase in there for the federal workers, and it's the belief of the appropriations committee members in the House that we can keep that cost of living increase in there as that bill goes through the process. So we do believe that we will be able to, once again, reverse the president and have the much needed cost of living increase for federal workers. So that's good. I mean, really, the federal workers, not only are they working so hard, but many of them are working in situations where they've had a lot of people sick because they were so demoralized, and so they're working in these agencies that have been depopulated, and so they're trying to do their work and other people's work too, and many of them don't agree with the president or the administration, but they're staying in these jobs because they want to serve the American public. And bless their hearts, we should be giving them a raise, not demagoguing. Okay, let's see. Is it correct that we pay 70% of the NATO budget? If so, do you think that is reasonable? If not, what will you do to make sure Europe pays its fair share? I don't know the exact number of what the NATO budget that we pay is. I do believe that everyone needs to pay their fair share of that budget. However, I don't think that the way to get our allies to pay their fair share is to threaten to leave NATO. If you'll recall, NATO was formed after World War II as a way to stabilize Europe, and it's done an incredible job of doing that ever since. Our NATO allies are probably our strongest allies in the world. And as I say, I don't know what the exact number is, but we can surely get it for you. Okay, this next one is elections in Russia. How are we going to ensure a safe election in November and beyond without Russian influence and interference? How do we get the Russian, okay, I'm just reading this like I see it. How do we get the Russian operative out of the White House? So a lot of us have been very concerned about making sure that we have a safe election in November, and Congress has funded efforts with the states to make sure that the states are doing testing and that they're identifying any efforts to interfere. I know my staff, have they already had that tabletop, Andre, have they already had that tabletop exercise yet? Oh, okay, Artie, you come up here, Artie. This is they love this when I do this. Art was at When was that exercise?
Thursday.
So they had a tabletop exercise with the Secretary of State's office on Thursday. What happened?
So it was
This
all
is
our,
Hi, everyone.
and this is the rest of my fabulous stuff.
It was all of the election officials across the state, so all the county commissioners and folks that work to put the elections on every year, and they went through a series of exercises. They were basically given the worst election day they could possibly get, and they had to come up with their solutions and things to do to overcome these obstacles. So they really learned different things in order to overcome hacking and people's information being released, so they kind of have those tools now to take away in case anything happens.
Yeah, and this is going on in all of the states. So we are really taking it seriously, even though the president tried to cut that budget for the states to ensure the integrity of the election system. With respect to the second question, Special Counsel Mueller's investigation is drawing to a close. And I really have been wanting to see what he comes up with. As I tell people frequently, I was in Congress when Bill Clinton was impeached on what I considered to be basically political reasons. And it absolutely tore up Washington. It impacted the presidency for quite some time. And Washington's already a mess, as Bob Woodward put it in his book, which is coming out this week, and which several Republicans told me yesterday, that the Republicans are starting to call Washington crazy town right now. And it does have that feeling. I think that we owe it to our constituents to do a very thorough investigation of if there's obstruction of justice, if there's worse, if there were ties to Russia in the last election. We need to get all the information. One of the things that has hampered us, of course, is the House Intelligence Committee and the Government Reform Committee and the other committees have just simply refused to do their job and to subpoena the appropriate records. Well, I think that, at least with respect to the House of Representatives, that's probably going to change in January. And you're going to have people like Adam Schiff and Diana DeGette who have subpoena authority. And we're going to be subpoenaing these records to get the evidence. And once we get that evidence, we're going to see what we've got. And I think it's really important to be very, very steady but very thorough and get everything and see where we're at. But one other thing I'll say though, with respect to all of these policies, I say this all the time, but it's important to repeat. Our framers really were genius. This is the most genius system of government in the world, in history. And the reason is, they set up 3 independent organizations for checks and balances. And what's Article 1? Congress. Article 1 of the Constitution, or the executive, or the courts, Congress. And Congress, in my opinion, the last few years has 100% failed to exercise its duty to be a check and balance of the executive branch. And so, people say, what do we do? What do we do? And I say, this is the genius of our founders. Every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election, and 1/3 of the Senate. And so if the citizens don't think that the majority that's controlling Congress is doing the job of checks and balances against the executive, then they have the ability every 2 years to make that change. And that's what we see going on right now. And, again, this is a through my congressional office town hall meeting, it's not a political event. And so I'm not saying this to be partisan. And I think it probably, if almost any of my Republican colleagues were here, they would agree with me, is the way that the polling is looking, and that the way that certainly when I talk to people are beginning to realize why it's so important to have that check and balance. And I think you're probably going to see a Democratic majority in the House, and we'll see about the Senate. But if we have at least one of the houses of Congress, then we can do those investigations and we can have that check and balance. Okay, here's a question. How much of Trump's rallies are being funded by tax money? The rallies themselves are not funded by tax money, but however, his security is funded by tax money. I don't know what that percentage is, but I do know under the federal law is that they do have to refund the cost of the rally to the federal government, except for the security. And that's true in either party. Let's see, is the economy currently so bad that efforts to weaken EPA and Endangered Species Act and other environmental and animal-related protection laws are necessary, or do Republicans just love to plunder and pillage? Did the dirty Farm Bill pass? Is net neutrality for sure due? Okay. The economy is good. And if any of you heard Barack Obama talk about this yesterday, the growing economy started after we dug ourselves out of the hole from the Great Recession, and it's continuing today. I'm concerned about, frankly, about a couple of things. I want to make sure that the economy doesn't get an artificial bubble like it did in 2000, 2001. We have to make sure that our financial institutions are solid. And the second thing is that this economic recovery has still not benefited middle-class families and lower-income families. And the hourly wage still has not kept up with the growing economy. We need to increase the minimum wage and all that. But also, healthcare costs and other costs are really gnawing into people's economic gains that they're making as insurance costs continue to go up. So we still need to continue to work on this. And P.S., these environmental regulations that the administration is trying to reverse, that has nothing to do with the economy. That just has to do with the fact that they don't want these regulations. I work a lot on these issues because it's another issue in my committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I've worked a lot on Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act, all of that. And it's interesting because actually shifting to clean energy and enforcing the environmental laws actually has helped grow the economy. And you can see it in a place like Colorado, where alternative energy like wind and solar have really helped to build a lot of our industries here in Colorado. And so I will say one thing about it. When I'm the chair of Oversight and Investigations, that's one thing I'm going to use my subpoena power for, is to get the documents out of the EPA about why they think it's such a good idea to weaken our bulwark environmental legislation, because I think that it's not only helped to clean up our air and water, but it's also helped to build our economy. The Farm Bill did not pass. It passed the House. I voted no on it because it was bad. But it got stuck over in the Senate. People thought that they had a compromise on it, but we have not. We were just talking about that last week. Anybody see the Farm Bill? No, it's still stuck over there in the Senate. Net neutrality, as you know, the Trump administration, under the new leadership at the Federal Communications Commission, reversed the net neutrality decision. However, we do have legislation, I'm an original co-sponsor, to restore net neutrality, and I think this is something you're going to be looking at as a priority, certainly for my committee, when the fall comes, because we really do need to have an even playing field when you're on the internet. This is a really radical question, okay, but I'm just going to read it. How can we get more scientific information and input into the decision-making process? For a while, they were calling me Miss Science down there at Energy and Commerce, because I public policy in any arena, healthcare, environment, you have to have the science to back it up. Why? Well, because the policy that you make may not solve the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're worried about cleaning up the water, you need to have scientific studies as to why the water's not clean. You know, what's in the water. I'll just give an example. Some of you know I've had a bill since 2010, even before most people knew what fracking was. I found out that the Republicans exempted the Safe Drinking Water Act from disclosure requirements for the chemicals put into for fracking. It's the only industry exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act. So I introduced a bill called the FRAC Act. And, you know, I tell people, it's not so radical of a bill. I don't really know why I haven't had a good time passing it. It says that if you're going to put chemicals into fracking fluid, which could potentially get into groundwater, you have to disclose what those chemicals are so that we can know if they're harming public health. Well, I mean, heaven forbid. And P.S., Colorado has a law like that. We have a law like that. And many other states do too. So we should have it at the federal level. So I agree with you, and I'm really appalled. And I've submitted a lot of questioning and so on. I'm really appalled by the efforts of the Trump administration to suppress scientific data. I think it's just everybody should be appalled by it. The second part of this, how to maintain and protect the separation of church and state. So I agree. I feel quite strongly about the First Amendment and separation of church and state. And I think that you have to be ever vigilant about these issues. And I also think this is a place where outside organizations really do help us. Groups like the ACLU and other groups that will come in and where they see people trying to infringe, to bring lawsuits to stop that. Okay, get term limits for the Supreme Court. I'm not sure I agree with term limits for the Supreme Court, but because ideally what you want is you want to have a court that's free from political. Let me just finish. And the problem that we have right now, it's not the term limits on the Supreme Court. It's the fact that Mitch McConnell changed the first. He blocked Merrick Garland, who was constitutionally and legitimately nominated by President Obama, and then he changed the Senate rules and to eliminate the 60-vote rule. And you know, when you have that 60-vote rule, you have to have comity among the senators, and you have to have agreement as to who you're appointed. And in the past, you had I can think of any number of Supreme Court justices who were appointed by Republican presidents, but who ended up being strong advocates for constitutional protections and for interpretation. And so I think the problem we have right now is the Senate. And I don't know how we put that genie back into the bottle, but that's what we have to do. We have to change the rule back in the Senate to make sure that we have the 60-vote rule back. Let's see. Will Pruitt back pay excessive spending? I don't know what that question means, but I've got my subpoenas ready to go on Pruitt. When will civility return when speaking to one another? I talked about that a little bit in my opening remarks, and I again am sometimes I get criticized for being civil, but you know, I always feel like you can be the most passionate advocate for your position, and I am. And if you could watch any of these hearings, if you watched the hearing last week in front of my committee on Twitter, and you saw me questioning Jeff Dorsey, I'm a tough questioner, and I'm tough in my positions, but I always try to be civil. And I think that it's really important that members of Congress do that. I think there's a hunger for that. People just don't know how. And you know, let me just say one other thing too. The press is not helpful in this because the press likes the fight, and so that they people who are trying to have regular order, who are trying to have compromise, they're not interested in that. They're just interested if we have a big fight with each other. And some of you have heard me tell the story, when we passed 21st Century Cures, Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell said 21st Century Cures was probably the most important bill that passed in that Congress, my bill that I did, but it hardly got any press. And people kept saying, Diana, why didn't you get more press? I'm like, well, it wasn't for lack of trying. It's because it was a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly, and Obama signed it. So I told Fred Upton, who's the Republican that I worked on the bill with, I said, Fred, here's what we should have done. We should have had a big fight on the House floor, calling each other's names, and then the narrative could have been sure dead. And then at the 11th hour, we could have had some kind of a dramatic reconciliation. Then we would have got, I mean, that's a joke, but it's stupid, but that's the way, unfortunately, our society. So, you know, one thing that would help is if you started doing anything, comedy, and, you know, if you see this stuff on TV, then you contact them and say, you know, I really want to see some information about what's happening proactively. I've got about 3 or 4 bills I'd be happy to tell you about that I think are going to be passing in the next couple of months. One is to update the way we do generic drug labeling, to make it easier for the FDA to improve that for people's health. I've also got a bill on drug compounding and some other different things that are going to pass, that are bipartisan. And so there's still a lot going on. Here's a question. How much can a Democratic-controlled House do to restore the ACA? So a lot of you have heard me talk in the past about the issues that I have about where we can go with the ACA. And there's a whole number of things that we can look at. I've been working with a group that was founded by a fellow named Andy Slavitt. Some of you might know Andy Slavitt. He was the CMS director under Obama. And he's put together a bipartisan group that's been meeting to start figuring out ways that we can do improvements in the ACA to help lower costs and so on. And there are a number of proposals that this bipartisan group is already working on to do that. But something else that I feel quite strongly is sort of now in my leadership role in Congress, we need to start thinking about moving towards a single payer system. What has happened now that we have the ACA, the American public understands what an insurance-based system is and the pros and cons, but they're also beginning to understand about what it would be like to have a single payer system and how you can eliminate things like these preferred benefit groups that are just negotiating drug prices for insurance companies and taking a percentage of the drugs. And so you know, frankly, I don't think that right away a Democratic-controlled Congress could pass a single-payer system. I'll tell you that. I don't think everybody agrees with that, but I do think that there's improvements that we could make right away, and I think we would get Republican support for these to strengthen the system and to start to reduce costs. And then one thing I think we can do, and I think it'd be a great idea, and I think we could pass this, is allow people between the age of 50 and 65 to buy into Medicare. And here's why. Here's why. Because the most expensive, the people who are most expensive expensive to insure under private insurance are the people between 50 and 65. And those are also people who are having a hard time right now paying some of the deductibles and the prescription drug prices and so on. So if you let those people buy into Medicare, you don't give it to them like you do people over 65, but you let them buy in, then you can start to see how efficient and cost-effective a system like this can be. And the other advantage of doing something like this is then a lot of people who do have the higher costs would buy into that. That would then strengthen the pool, the insurance pool, for everybody else, for my two kids who are in their 20s and everybody else. And that might also have the effect of reducing their insurance costs because some of those more expensive people are taking out the pool. So that's one thing I think we could maybe do. I could shop in that around, and there's a lot of interest in people doing that. Okay, let's see. What definitive action are you taking, for example, sponsoring legislation to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, to revamp, not peek around the edge of healthcare? Please do not reference the 21st century experiment. There is legislation to allow Medicare to renegotiate drug prices. I am an original co-sponsor of that bill. I was in Congress when they allowed Medicare to cover prescription drug pricing, and that was great. But at that time, there were some of us who were fighting very, very hard to allow them to negotiate it. The VA negotiates prescription drug prices. Your insurance plans negotiate prescription drug prices. And if Medicare could negotiate prescription drug prices, you would immediately see a reduction in your prescription drug prices across the board in this country. I think that would be a really great thing to do. Okay, here's one about the BOLD Act. Thank you for being a friend to the fight to end Alzheimer's. We need your continued support to help families struggling with this disease. The BOLD Act strives to provide easily accessible agencies for these families. Can you give us your thoughts on the BOLD Act? I'm probably co-sponsoring the BOLD Act. I don't recognize this right away, but Andrea Ottoby is sitting right here in the first row, and if you talk to her afterwards, we will have her check out what's going on with that and what we can do to try to get it going. Let's see. I understand that over 500 children are still being held in detention. Is the House working on any legislation to provide better funding and processing for those seeking refugee status? With so many millions of displaced persons in the world, it is a shame that the House and Senate won't legislate taking in more refugees than the less than 45,000 that the executive branch is willing to bring in. Amen. I agree with that entire statement. We should, when I went down to the border and I was talking, we went to one of the ICE detention facilities, and we met with, there were about 20 of us, 20 congresswomen in my group, and we met with about 45 women in this detention center, and we were talking to them, and they were all from the Central American countries where they were terrified of their lives and their children's lives. And then my chief of staff and another member of Congress and I, we actually went out to the border in Brownsville, and we went over to the Mexican side, and my chief almost forgot her passport. I said, you really want your passport so they'll let you back in. But we went over to the Mexican side, and we saw, you've been reading about these families who have been waiting at the border because they were told if you come in through the border facilities, then we will allow you to claim refugee status. So they were waiting there, and we talked to this woman. It was a woman and her son, he was in his late teens, and then her younger son, and then another daughter. And we asked her why she had come there. She was from Guatemala, and she had come there because the gangs, this is what she told us, the gangs killed her husband, and they told her if she didn't give them her older son and her daughter, that they were going to kill all of them and the younger son. Now, that seems to me to be a credible claim for refugees here, you know? And all these people we talked to, this is who we were talking to. And so I agree. I think there's a couple of things we need to do. Number one, we need to increase the number. We need to take these claims seriously, because these really are coming in from people from this set of countries, and people really are afraid. And I mean, obviously you need to screen people to make sure you don't have criminals coming in and gang members and so on. And there has been a tiny little bit of that, but most of these people are people who are really fleeing from violence and gangs. And we need to recognize that, and we need to treat them with respect, and we need to think about what we're going to do to help them with their status. But beyond that, we need to work with the governments of their home countries. This is something that the Trump administration doesn't seem to recognize at all. We did it in Nicaragua, and we've done it in other places in Central and South America. We've continued to try to work on this with Mexico, is to work with these governments to help reduce the gang violence back home, to reduce these problems, so that these folks don't feel like they have to make that treacherous journey all the way to the United States. And that seems to me it should be a real priority for us. Okay. Several questions about what am I doing about the children separated at the borders. I want you to know that we have been, when I say me, I mean me and my colleagues certainly on my side of the aisle, and the congresswomen, we've been pounding on our leadership in Congress and also on the administration to give us answers. And, you know, I don't mean to keep deferring things, but, you know, we're in the minority party. So, for example, when this first happened, when this crisis first happened, and we found out about it, I went to my chairman and I said, we need to have a hearing immediately. HHS, Health and Human Services, they're the ones in charge of administering the facilities where they're holding the kids, okay? And so that's, again, in my committee jurisdiction. So I said to my chairman, we need to have a hearing immediately, like tomorrow, about what the administration is doing about these kids. What kind of treatment are they getting? What are their conditions? And how are we going to reunite them with their families? You know what he said to me? He said to me, well, you know, let's just how it all works out. I said, no, we can't do that. And we pressured and pressured and pressured. And that's why we went to the border and we did other things. But ultimately, the reason why these kids were released was because of the court. And so when, again, if I was the chairman of this committee, I'd be having those hearings. I'd be calling those guys in. And I would be making sure that the kids got reunited. This is why it matters who's in charge of Congress and who's in charge of the White House. Okay. Okay, here's one. This is a little person, so I'll try to answer it in a non-partisan way. Congresswoman, I'm concerned that our party, I guess you mean the Democratic Party, doesn't have leadership that's empowering the base, as well as reaching out to and energizing independence. Does the party feel the same? And if so, what is being done to ensure that the majority will become the minority in Congress and the White House by 2020? Well, so I never forget that my district, even though my district, most of the registered voters are Democrats, I also represent all of the unaffiliated voters and all the Republican voters, and also people who are not registered to vote, although I think it's very unwise not to vote in this day and age. I think people need to vote. And one thing I think was really actually actually quite useful in Colorado was we allowed unaffiliated voters to vote in the primaries in June. And nobody was quite sure how that would work, but what that does is when unaffiliated voters are allowed to vote in the primaries, it really makes the parties reach out to unaffiliated voters and to try to persuade them about the issues. And so I think it's important. I think, I always tell people, my office is welcome and open to everybody, and we try to address everybody's concerns all the time. Here's a question. How is the Democratic Party addressing the racism within its own party? This is an issue. It's not just an issue in our society. It is an issue in the Democratic Party. We are having some very pointed and frank discussions, and I think that that's really useful right now. What I don't think is useful is name calling on any side. I think it's really important to have very tough conversations about the Democratic Party, about and about our country in general. It's interesting to think about, and I think about it a lot, because John Lewis is one of my colleagues in Congress, and of course he's the icon of the civil rights movement, and it's been one of my great privileges to be able to work with John on issues like voting rights, making sure and citizenship, party registration, making sure that everybody who's eligible to vote can vote, and making sure that we don't find subtle or overt ways to suppress people from voting. It's a sense an issue in our entire history of our country, and it persists today. Anybody who thinks that voter suppression is not persisting among racial minorities is wrong. It's persisting throughout the South. It's persisting in Hispanic populations with efforts to have citizenship proof and all of this. And we need to address all of these issues. But we think we've made progress, and we have made some progress. But then I see a study, like the study that I saw this summer. I don't know if any of you saw this, that maternal deaths are substantially higher among African American women than white women. And this is true no matter what the socioeconomic background is. And so you look at that and you say, geez, we think we've come so far in this society, but yet we still have so far that we have to go. And the racism is, it's not overt most of the time, but it still is overt, but still it permeates our society. So I actually, as you know, I do a lot of work in the healthcare arena, and the head of the Congressional Black Caucus Healthcare Subcommittee, Healthcare Task Force, is a woman named Robin Kelly. She's a congresswoman from the Chicago area, and she has a background in health in health management. So I approached Robin and I said, Robin, I think we should team up on trying to put together some legislation to address these racial disparities in healthcare between African American women and white women. And so we've actually developed legislation, and we're working on it with the Congressional Black Caucus, but also with the Health Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee to try to get this passed. So my answer to this is we need to continue to have the one-on-one conversations every day, but we also need to have a really in-depth examination of our policies and our laws in this country to make sure that they're not causing discrimination that we may not even be thinking about. Okay. How can I make a difference? Write letters, call, email. I feel so discouraged and helpless. Don't feel discouraged and helpless. Call, write letters, and email, because it really does help. Sometimes you might know about something that I don't know about, and if you tell me, then sometimes that has changed the vote. But also, ultimately, your elected representatives, we represent you. And so it's really your thoughts. And it's not just me, it's the whole Colorado delegation and our senators, is they need to hear from you. And if they don't listen to you, then when they're up for reelection the next time, you need to go vote for somebody else. And, I don't say this in a partisan way. If you don't like the way I represent you, go campaign for my Republican opponent. And I mean it, If you don't like the way someone represents you, then express your opinions and then go vote. That's what this democracy is all about. Let's see. Medicaid. Cash limits for Medicaid beneficiaries. In 1980, the cash limits for Medicaid beneficiaries was set at $2,000. As I asked at the last town hall, when will Medicaid beneficiaries possibly have higher limits? $2,000 in 1980 and the purchasing power of $6,430 today. I would like it to be $10,000. This is one of the things I would like to investigate. Is I'd like to investigate and it's not just cash limits for Medicaid beneficiaries. There's also a lot of other limits that are set in some of our statutes, like Social Security and Medicare, that because of inflation, they've gone way, way up beyond that. We need to be able to figure out how to pay for that. Okay, Cross Disability Coalition. Don't worry, I was going to call on where are they?
They're over there.
Good. The wait list for Medicaid waivers for people with developmentally intellectual disabilities is close to 3,000. How would I prioritize or eliminate the wait list for these vital long-term services and supports? Well, if there's a wait list, that means that we have to put more resources into the program so everybody who needs those services can get them. Just taking them off the list doesn't make the issue go away or the need go away. And so that's what we need to prioritize. The people who are in charge right now, that's not their priority. And I hate to say that, but that's true. I also just want to take a minute. My friends from ADAPT and the Atlantis community are sitting over here. And I want to tell you what a I'm sure you know this. They do the most unbelievable job at the national level, getting their message across. And ADAPT was founded, and the Atlantis community, thank you very much. But they were founded right here in Denver, Colorado, to protect and advocate for the issues of the disability community. And last week we had a hearing. On a bill about the Disability Integration Act. This is a bill that's going to help Americans with disabilities integrate into the community, and it also helps them get resources for care and treatment that they need to be successful, productive citizens that they can have in their homes. But I mean, this is like, again, really, is the way the law works. We'll pay for them to go to nursing homes, but we won't pay for the help for them to be in their homes and being able to be a productive member of society. So we had a great hearing last week, and people from ADAPT were there, and it was, and I don't know when we're going to pass that bill, but I think we might pass that bill in the next few weeks.
Ooh. And that's the Empower Care Act, and thank you for carrying that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for sponsoring the Disability Integration Act.
Yeah.
And so this is what all of this is about on the letter and on the banners. Thank you. And this Disability Integration Act that you're speaking about is bipartisan across the Colorado House, U.S. House.
Yeah, this is so what you said is the Disability Integration Act is in the Colorado House. Or, I mean, it's co-sponsored by
By the whole committee. And you started that.
Yeah, so we're working on it.
Then
Okay.
the other things really quick, like I said, everything is a thank you, and we have two issues. And one is in the next Congress, passing legislation that would exempt consumer-directed and family caregiving from EVB.
Yep.
That's one. And the other thing, we just want to report back from you around the Judge Rottenberg Center and the issue that we brought to you and the FDA.
Oh,
and
yes,
Scott
yes,
got
yes, yes. Okay, yes, so there's this issue about electronic verification and, for Medicaid programs. And we're working on getting that delayed so that,
Yes,
you know,
thank you for the delay.
we want to make sure that people aren't committing fraud in Medicaid, not the disabled community, but the providers. But on the other hand, we don't want to put an additional burden or a First Amendment violation on the disability community.
And that,
And
I
then-
just wanted to say real quickly, that's what separates the consumer direction, is
Right.
we are the providers, and so if we're committing fraud, that fraud's on us, and we're not gonna do that.
Right.
That's gonna jeopardize our services, so
Right,
thank
and that's
you.
what we need to address. Then the other issue, this is an issue, this is why it's really important, if you see an issue, bring it to me, because I don't naturally know about all these, and the ADAPT and Atlantis folks brought this to me. There is still an agency in Massachusetts that is doing shock therapy on patients, despite the fact that the UN and every other international organization has stopped it. And the FDA has a rule pending in front of it that would stop this, but it has not been approved by the FDA commissioner. So when we had a hearing in my committee on July 25th about something else, but I told Dr. Gottlieb, the head of the FDA, that we needed this rule passed right now. We shouldn't be giving shock therapy in the 21st century. And I followed up with a letter. I have not heard back from them, but I'll let you know when I do. Okay, I'm going to go back to these. I just wanted, I wanted to make sure we got their questions in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, here's a question from Facebook. How do we protect reproductive rights if Kavanaugh is confirmed to SCOTUS? Well, I think we need to fight to protect reproductive rights every day. I'm deeply worried about Kavanaugh. If I was in the Senate, I would not vote for Kavanaugh because I think that he's been duplicitous on his answers on Roe versus Wade. If you saw the questions, I think it was Cory Booker was asking him, they found these emails where he was saying he wasn't so sure that Roe versus Wade was settled law. But he had previously said in his testimony that it was settled law. And so I'm deeply concerned if he gets confirmed about that. I will say that and many of you know I'm the co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus in Congress. I'm hoping that senators that clearly are two senators, if you're concerned about this, now's the time, folks. Now's the time to contact our two senators, Bennett and Gardner, and tell them about your concerns about this, and tell them that you're going to hold them accountable if they vote for Kavanaugh, if you're concerned about this, or any other issue. But the second thing I'll say is, we're going to have to cross the bridge of what would happen with the Supreme Court if they did reverse Roe versus Wade, or if they greatly weakened it. And one thing I'm concerned about already is, and P.S., we could fix this through legislation, right? Yes.
We could pass, if this did happen, we could pass legislation that allowed women to have their full range of reproductive rights throughout their lives. And so if heaven forbid this happens, then people need to realize it's not all lost. Now they just have to take it to the state legislatures and ultimately to Congress. And the other thing that this Kavanaugh hearing has really put into focus is how many states, mainly in the southern United States, have had already so many burdens and restrictions put onto the providing of abortion services that most of the clinics have already shut down there. So anybody who thinks that there's not already access to abortion being thwarted in this country, that's wrong. It is. And this is one of the missions of the Pro-Choice Caucus, is to make sure that we have federal laws that allow access for everybody in this country to the same health care services that they need to get. We have a lot of ideas for what we're going to do after the election. I think we have time for a couple more. Why aren't we talking about prioritizing energy issues? We're trying to avoid catastrophic climate change and are not on track to do so. And no one is talking about it honestly. Even if we don't care about the climate, it's an important economic move. If we want the U.S. to stay dominant, whatever country solves this problem will make a lot of money. We need to kill coal, fund archive, and start talking honestly about how we're going to become a low emissions nation. I agree. And let me say, I was just, in August, I was at an Aspen Institute conference on climate change. And I thought, well, that's going to be, and it was, this conference was in Vancouver. So I went from Denver, which was you couldn't see the mountains because of the smoke from the forest fires, to Vancouver, where you couldn't see the mountains because of the smoke from the forest fires. And we're all sitting around talking about climate change. A fellow I know who's an academic and runs a think tank, he said, for a while, Mother Nature was just tapping us on the shoulder. Now, this summer, Mother Nature's been shoving us in the back, saying, what are you going to do about this? And I agree. I think it's a real imperative. But again, I was pleasantly motivated because there's a lot of new ideas that the academics and that policymakers in other countries have about carbon reduction, about ways that we can legislate to have carbon reduction. And what really pleased me about this conference is these Aspen conferences, they're a bipartisan conference with House and Senate, Democrats, Republicans, and academics and thinkers. And what I was so pleased about was the Republicans who were in this delegation with me, and they were not the liberal Republicans. Many of them, there was a guy, a very conservative Republican from the southern United States, and on the last day I said, well, here's some of my takeaways about what I think a climate change bill could look like, and I listed them, there were 4. And at the end, he held up his hand, he goes, I'd support that bill. So when I got back to Washington this week, I found him and I said, okay, let's start writing the bill. So seriously, I think, even though you don't see it in the press so much, there's a group of us in Congress who are really committed to dealing with this. And P.S., there's a huge bipartisan group who are appalled that Trump withdrew from the Paris Treaty. And so we've got to pass legislation, and you're right, time is of the essence here. And we've got to have, and it's not just good for the environment, it's good for the economy, like you said. Okay, let's see. I'm seeing if there's one that we haven't. I'm trying to find one that we haven't asked. Okay. Here's one on the opioid crisis. for the opioid crisis graph to coincide with the allowing of pharmaceutical companies to advertise drugs on television, is it time to look at that relationship? I'll do that and then I'll do the next one. There have been some interesting articles and books written about the opioid crisis and the beginning of the development of these drugs and the selling. I'm not sure if it's time towards the, I'm not sure if the advertising of drugs on television is what caused this. Purdue Pharmaceuticals, have some of you read the history of this when they developed it and then how they persuaded doctors that these opioids were not addictive and so on. I'm not sure if that's so much the advertising of drugs on television, but I will tell you this, I do think it's time for us to look at advertising of drugs on TV. I think it's ridiculous. Number one, it costs a lot of money, and number two, people shouldn't be picking, they shouldn't be picking their drug. My favorite one, some of you have probably seen this. You're watching television, and it's a drug for people who are blind, and it's to give them a better sense of their circadian rhythm. And I'm like, really? They're running an ad for this on television? They must make money from it. But I think it's ridiculous. And so I'd be all for that. We have to think about the First Amendment implications, but I gotta say, I think there's ways that you could control that. Then the second, okay, I'll read this question. I guess it'll be our last one. What's the behind-the-scenes vibe between Republicans and Democrats? Are Republicans really behind Trump and ignoring his amoral blatherings? Do they complain about him behind the scenes? Well, so my Republican colleagues, we've been talking to them about this, and I've been talking to them a lot. In fact, some of you have heard this story. At the inauguration, they seat you by class. It's kind of like a college reunion. So I'm sitting there with my class, and I'm sitting there next to one of my Republican colleagues, and the president gave that speech. Remember his really horrible speech at the inauguration, and my colleague looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, 3 branches of government, checks and balances. You're the check and balance. And he's like, oh, I know. And so that's what I keep saying to them is, I keep saying, guys, you have to step up. And if you're not going to step up, the voters are going to put a different group in charge, and we will step up. And when I talk to my Republican colleagues, and I work with, as you know, I work with a lot of Republicans, and all the people I work with, they're well motivated, they're there for the right reasons. Most all of them are good people. And they kind of just started rolling their eyes and they don't want to participate. And part of it is, I think, and it's really too bad, but President Trump still has about 80 to 90% popularity among Hispanics. And so many of my colleagues are worried that if they kind of buck the system, then they'll get a primary and they'll lose. And so I think, I think that's wrong. I think you should be in Congress to do the right thing. And I think if you're doing the right thing, then your constituents will reelect you. And that's what our American system's about. So what I'm hoping is, if we do have the change that I think we may have in November, I'm hoping that this same group of Republicans that I've been working with for years will come around and they will work with us on issues like the ACA and the immigration reform, climate change, all of these issues, because they're really important American issues, and it needs to happen in a bipartisan way. When we took the majority in 2006, the Republicans were so mad at us that they wouldn't work with us on anything. And I don't think that was good ultimately for the outcome of the ACA. I think it would have been a much better bill if we had a bipartisan bipartisan effort on that. And I also just think it would be better for this country. You know, we've been so driven by partisanship and by whatever the tweets coming out of the White House at 5 a.m. in the morning are. We need some institution that's going to help us come together, and I would hope it would be the U.S. Congress. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for coming every week. If you have any issues, talk to my staff or call, and also make sure you're on my e-newsletter, which I assume you are since you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.